He threw the divorce papers across the marble table like they were nothing, like 3 years of her life meant nothing. Kang Jae-hyun didn't even look at her when he said it. Sign them, tonight. His voice so flat it didn't even sound like cruelty. It sounded like business. And that was somehow worse. Amara Bennett stood in the middle of the most expensive penthouse in Seoul, surrounded by everything money could buy, and felt absolutely nothing beneath her feet. Because the man she had loved through bloodshed, through sleepless nights pressing towels against his wounds, through every secret she'd swallowed to protect him, that man was looking at her right now like she was a liability to be cut loose. She had planned to tell him something tonight, something that would have changed everything. She never got the chance. If someone handed you proof that the person you loved destroyed your life, and you believed it without asking a single question, could you live with that choice? If this story already has your heart, hit that like button right now and drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. And if you don't want to miss what happens next, subscribe and stay close. The stories only get more intense from here. The penthouse smelled like leather and cold air. It always did. Amara used to find it comforting, the scent of a controlled world, a man who kept everything in its place. She used to curl into that stillness after his worst nights and tell herself it meant safety. Now the air just felt thin. She stood near the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the Han River, the city blazing gold and white below them, beautiful the way expensive things always were. From a distance, never when you got close enough to see the cracks. She wasn't looking at the view. She was looking at the papers on the table. They were already printed, already notarized. The date at the top was today's. He had prepared them before she even walked through the door. Jae-hyun. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. That was the thing about 3 years beside a man like him. You learned how to hold yourself together even when the floor was falling out from under you. What is this? It wasn't really a question. She could read. She could see her name printed in black ink, followed by his, followed by the cold legal language that meant, this is over. Kang Jae-hyun stood on the opposite side of the table, his jacket still on, his posture the same as it always was in a boardroom or an interrogation, controlled, deliberate, giving away nothing. He was 41 years old, and he looked like a man who had never once in his life been surprised by anything. Thick shoulders, jaw like it had been carved with intent. Eyes the particular dark shade that made people describe him in news articles as formidable and in criminal reports as dangerous. Right now those eyes were on her. Not with anger, not with grief, with certainty. You know what it is, he said. Tell me anyway. A beat. He glanced away, not out of discomfort, she realized, but calculation, deciding how much to give her. We received confirmation 3 days ago, he said. Financial records from the Incheon accounts. Communication logs. A recorded call from 5 months ago. He paused. Your voice, Amara, not someone else's. Yours. Her stomach dropped, but she kept her face still. That's not possible. I heard it myself. Then someone manufactured it. I had it verified by 2 separate audio analysts. She opened her mouth and closed it again. The words felt suddenly useless. Not because she didn't have them, but because she could already see that nothing she said was going to penetrate whatever he had already decided. The way he was standing there, the way the papers were already printed. He had not come here tonight to have a conversation. He had come here to execute a decision. That was what broke her first. Not the accusation. The fact that he hadn't asked. 3 years. Not one question. You think I talked to federal investigators, she said. You think I handed them information about your organization. I think the evidence is unambiguous. Jae-hyun. She took a breath. Look at me. Look at me and tell me you believe that. He did look at her. That was the worst part. He looked directly at her, and what she saw in his face wasn't doubt or hesitation or even guilt. It was a man who had already made his peace with what he was doing. A man who had filed this away under necessary losses and moved on before she even had the chance to fight back. It doesn't matter what I believe, he said. It matters what I can prove. And what I can prove is that this marriage is now a liability to the organization. The word liability landed somewhere behind her sternum. I'm a liability, she repeated. The association is. Yes. She felt something shift inside her. Not breaking, not yet, but bending. The particular bend that happens when you finally understand that the conversation you prepared for and the conversation you're actually in are two completely different things. She had prepared to tell him about the pregnancy tonight. She had spent 3 days working up to it, rehearsing how she would say it, imagining his face. She had believed, and she understood now how catastrophically she had miscalculated, that the news would reach something in him that his empire never could, that it would finally be the thing that made him choose differently. She had the ultrasound photos in her bag. She had been carrying them for 4 days. She did not take them out. Not because she'd decided not to, but because something in her, some instinct that had kept her alive through 3 years of a world that chewed people up, told her that if she pulled out those photos right now, in this room, with him looking at her like that, she would be handing the most vulnerable thing she had ever held to a man who was not currently capable of protecting it. She left the photos in the bag. "So this is how you end things," she said. "After everything. I gave you a good life." "I didn't ask for a good life. I asked for honesty." Something moved across his face, fast, gone before she could name it. The first crack in the marble. But it sealed over immediately, and she wasn't sure she hadn't imagined it. "The papers are straightforward," he said. "The settlement is generous. You'll have access to the sole account for 6 months. The Busan property is transferred to your name upon signing, and Stop." Her voice came out harder than she intended. "Stop talking about settlements. Amara, someone set me up." She said it quietly. No performance, no hysteria, just the flat truth laid out between them. "Someone fabricated evidence and you chose to believe it without coming to me, without asking me a single question, after 3 years. She watched his face. "Does that not matter to you at all?" He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed, slightly, just slightly, enough that she noticed because she had learned every register of this man. "What matters is that the risk exists. Whether or not the evidence is entirely accurate, the perception within the organization, the perception." She almost laughed. Almost. "I am your wife, and you are divorcing me based on perception. I am protecting what I built." The words fell into the room and sat there. Amara looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the man who had held her through nightmares, who had once spent 3 hours in a hospital waiting room because she'd sprained her wrist and refused to leave until the doctor confirmed it wasn't broken, who had told her, once, in the dark, in a voice she'd never heard from him before or since, that she was the only place he ever felt quiet. She looked at that man and understood that he was not in the room right now. The room contained Kang Jae-hyun, the organization's leader, who had just calculated that she was no longer worth the risk. She picked up the pen from the table. Her hand didn't shake. She had promised herself it wouldn't. She signed her name on every page he'd marked with a small yellow tab. Efficient, like he'd trained her to be. She set the pen down and straightened up and did not look at him while she did it, because if she looked at him, she might say something she couldn't take back. Not out of anger, but out of the specific devastation of loving someone who has just proven they don't fully understand what they're holding. When she was done, she picked up her bag from the chair beside her. "When you finally understand what you have done," she said, and her voice was very quiet, very even. "I hope the guilt doesn't destroy you." He said nothing. She walked to the door. She did not run. She did not slam it. She pulled it closed behind her with exactly the amount of force needed, and not 1 pound more. In the elevator going down, she pressed her back against the mirrored wall and put one hand flat against her stomach and breathed, just breathed. The city descended past the elevator glass, lights and bridges and the river far below, and she stood there in the middle of all that wealth and all that ambition, and felt, for the first time in 3 years, entirely free of it. It did not feel good. She had not expected it to. Freedom, she had learned, rarely felt like relief at first. It mostly just felt like falling. The lobby of the building was empty at this hour, except for the security guard who had nodded to her every morning for 2 years, and who nodded to her now with his usual polite expression, no indication that anything was different, no awareness that the woman walking past him had just signed away a life. She walked out into the Seoul night. The air was cold, carrying the edge of approaching winter. She stood on the pavement outside the building and looked up at the top floor. The lit windows of the penthouse, the faint silhouette visible behind the glass. Standing there, not moving, watching her leave. She turned away first. She had no particular plan in that moment, no prepared next step. She had spent so much mental energy preparing to tell him about the baby that she hadn't allowed herself to prepare for this outcome. as if imagining it would make it more possible. She flagged down a taxi, gave an address she almost didn't remember, a friend's apartment on the south side, a woman named Grace who had once told her, without knowing exactly why she said it, "If you ever need a place, you call me." In the taxi, she did not cry. She sat with her bag on her lap and her hand still resting on her stomach and watched the city slide past the window. Seoul at night was relentless. It did not dim, it did not slow down, it did not acknowledge that somewhere inside it, a woman had just had her entire understanding of her life restructured in the span of 40 minutes. She thought about the ultrasound photos. She thought about what she had almost said. And she made, in the quiet of that taxi, the first decision entirely her own in 3 years. She was going to disappear. Not out of defeat, not out of surrender. Because the man she loved had just proven that his empire would always come first. And she was not going to raise her child in the shadow of something that had just thrown her away without asking a single question. She would go somewhere no one in his world would think to look. She would start again. She would protect what he had not thought to protect. The taxi moved through the city. She kept her hand on her stomach. Outside, Seoul blazed and roared the way it always did, indifferent to the small human catastrophes playing out in the back seats of its cabs, the hotel rooms, the high-rise penthouses with their views of the river. Somewhere above her, in a lit window she could no longer see, Kang Jae-hyun stood with the signed divorce papers in his hands. She didn't know what his face looked like in that moment. She never let herself wonder. She had learned, in 3 years beside a man who treated emotion like weakness, to stop giving her imagination to things she could not change. There was only forward now. Only the decision already made. Only the life she was going to build with her own 2 hands, in a place he would never find, for a child who deserved better than a kingdom built on fear. The taxi crossed a bridge over the Han River. Amara Bennett did not look back. 3 weeks after Amara walked out of that penthouse, the Seoul underworld noticed something was wrong with Kang Jae-hyun. Not wrong in a way you could point to, not wrong in the way of a man falling apart visibly. No drinking, no public rages, no spectacular deterioration that his enemies could photograph and circulate. Wrong in a quieter, more dangerous way. The kind of wrong that made his lieutenants choose their words more carefully than usual. The kind that made men who had faced down armed rivals suddenly find reasons to look at the floor when their boss entered a room. Kang Jae-hyun had always been controlled. That was his reputation, the thing that made him more feared than bosses twice his age, who used violence the way other men used punctuation, constantly, carelessly, without particular intent. Jae-hyun had always been precise, surgical. I was the man who would sit across a table from someone who had stolen from him and speak quietly for 40 minutes, and by the end of it, the thief would be confessing things he hadn't even done yet, just to make the conversation stop. That version of Jae-hyun was gone. In its place was something colder and considerably less predictable. Min Woo-jin noticed it first, because it was his job to notice. He had been Jae-hyun's closest lieutenant for 7 years, which in their line of work was approximately the equivalent of a geological era. He had watched his boss operate through betrayals, through territorial wars, through the kind of pressure that turned most men into either ghosts or monsters. He had always believed that Jae-hyun was the rare exception, the man who came out the other side of all of it, still recognizably human. He was revising that assessment now. It was a Tuesday morning, early enough that the city still had that gray, unfinished quality when Woo-jin knocked on the door of Jae-hyun's private office on the 14th floor of the Gangnam building they used for operations that required a certain distance from the organization's more visible interests. "Come in." Woo-jin came in. Jae-hyun was at his desk with 3 open laptops, a stack of printed reports, and a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold an hour ago. He was wearing yesterday's shirt. He hadn't shaved. These were not, in isolation, alarming details. Men in their business kept irregular hours. But Woo-jin had known this man for 7 years, and he had never once seen Kang Jae-hyun in yesterday's shirt. The man ironed things. The man had opinions about collar stays. "The Busan meeting is at 11, Woo-jin said. "I know when it is. Park's people are expecting you in person. Then they'll be mildly disappointed." Jae-hyun turned a page in one of the reports without looking up. "Send Lee. He knows the accounts." Woo-jin didn't move. "You've sent Lee to the last 4 meetings." Lee is competent. Park is starting to ask questions about whether you're still. Park can ask whatever he likes. Jae-hyun looked up then, and Woo-jin registered, not for the first time in recent weeks, that his boss's eyes had taken on a particular quality. Not rage exactly. More like a man who had stopped filtering, who was operating on something rawer than strategy and hadn't entirely decided whether that was a problem. Is there something specific you came in here to tell me, or are you just collecting information about my mental state to report back to the senior counsel? The words landed with enough edge that Woo-jin felt them even through 7 years of scar tissue. I came to tell you the Incheon contact wants a follow-up on the audit findings, he said carefully, and to ask whether you've eaten anything today. A pause. Jae-hyun looked at him for a moment with an expression that was almost, not quite, but almost, something recognizable. I'm fine, he said. Okay. Don't do that. Do what? Say okay like you mean something else. Jae-hyun pushed back from the desk and stood, and for a moment he just stood there with his hands on the desk surface, looking down at the papers. He was quiet enough that Woo-jin started to feel the particular discomfort of watching a person resist something internal. The Incheon audit turned up 3 anomalies in the February transfers. I want them tracked back to their source accounts by Friday. I'll put Choi on it. I want you on it. Me personally. Yes. Woo-jin nodded once. He turned to leave. Woo-jin, he stopped. Has anyone heard anything? It wasn't phrased as a question, exactly. It had the weight of something that had been carried around for weeks before being finally set down. Woo-jin turned back. He didn't pretend not to understand. Nothing confirmed, he said. She left her phone in the apartment, cleared the Busan account but didn't touch the Seoul one. No activity on the cards we have records for. He paused. She doesn't want to be found. Jae-hyun's jaw tightened, just slightly. That wasn't what I asked. I know. Woo-jin held his boss's gaze. She's safe, as far as we can tell. No signs of anything. Hostile. She just left. The silence that followed had a particular texture to it. Woo-jin had spent enough time in rooms with powerful men to know the difference between silence that was empty and silence that was working very hard to contain something. This was the second kind. Good, Jae-hyun said finally. The word came out flat and functional and utterly unconvincing. Woo-jin left. In the hallway outside, he stood for a moment with his back against the wall and let out a slow breath. Then he pulled out his phone and sent a message to his most trusted field contact. 3 words, no context, and went to track down Choi before Jae-hyun decided to fire someone for the Incheon numbers. Inside the office, Jae-hyun sat back down in front of his 3 laptops and his cold coffee and the reports he had been reading for the past 4 hours without, if he was honest with himself, retaining a meaningful percentage of their contents. He picked up his phone, set it down, picked it up again. He did not call anyone. He had not slept more than 3 hours at a stretch in 22 days. He had not said this to anyone because it was the kind of detail that invited follow-up questions he had no interest in answering, and also because he had decided, the morning after he'd signed his own copy of the divorce papers and couriered them to his attorney, that what he was experiencing was a calibration problem rather than a personal crisis. A recalibration. The organization was adjusting to a change in its internal structure, and he was the organization, and therefore he was also adjusting. That was the framework he had built to contain the situation. It was not working particularly well, but it was the framework he had, and he was using it. The problem was the 3 a.m. hours. During the day, there was enough meetings, decisions, operational problems that needed immediate attention, the relentless mechanical grind of running something as complex and inherently unstable as what he ran. During the day, he could stay inside the machinery of it and not feel the thing that was waiting at the edges. At 3 in the morning, lying on the couch in his private office, because he hadn't been back to the penthouse since the night she'd signed those papers, there was nothing between him and the thing at the edges. He thought about her face. Not the end of it, not the moment she signed, not the way she'd said what she'd said before she left, though those images had a way of appearing without invitation. He thought about before that, the way she'd looked at him across the table when he'd said, "It doesn't matter what I believe." The particular quality of her expression in that moment, not shock, not anger, not the wounded disbelief he might have expected, something worse than all of those. The expression of a person who has just, in real time, revised a fundamental assumption about their world. She had assumed he would ask. He had not asked. That detail, small, structural, irreversible, had lodged itself somewhere in him, and he had not been able to dislodge it in 22 days of trying. He hadn't asked because the evidence was there, and verified and asking felt like a performance of doubt he didn't have time for. He hadn't asked because in his world, a man who hesitated at confirmed evidence was a man whose hesitation cost lives. He hadn't asked because, and this was the part that came to him at 3 a.m. with the particular cruelty of truths that arrived too late, because asking would have meant sitting across from her and watching her deny it and then having to choose, in real time, between her words and the evidence, and he had not trusted himself to choose correctly. So he had not asked. He had removed the choice by making the decision before she walked in. He reached for the cold coffee and drank it without tasting it, and went back to the February transfer reports. 2 floors below him, in the building's secure conference room, 3 men were having a conversation they had not scheduled and would not document. The oldest of the 3 was Han Byung-soo, the organization's financial architect, 61 years old, thin as a rumor, with the kind of face that gave nothing away even in sleep, or so his subordinates claimed. The second was Ryu Sung-min, head of external acquisitions, whose primary talent was knowing which doors in Seoul opened to which amounts of money. The third was a man whose name only a handful of people knew, identified in internal records by a code that changed monthly, referred to in this conversation only as the Incheon contact. "He's destabilizing," Han said, not with satisfaction, as a fact. "He's grieving," Ryu said. "Same outcome." The Incheon contact said nothing for a moment. He had a way of waiting that made the people around him feel like they were taking an exam. "The question is timeline," he said. "If it's temporary, 6 months, behavioral correction, he finds his footing. We hold position and take no action. If it's structural, Han said. "You don't know that." He sent Lee to the Park meeting for the 4th time. Park is 2 steps from taking his business to the Daejin faction. Han spread his hands on the table. "That's not grief. That's a man who has stopped caring whether his decisions have consequences." Ryu shifted in his seat. "He's still running operations. The numbers are running themselves on momentum he built over 8 years. Momentum expires." Han looked at the Incheon contact. "What we need to know is whether there's a recovery or whether we start making contingency arrangements." The Incheon contact folded his hands. "That determination requires information we don't yet have." "Such as?" "Whether the woman is actually gone, or whether she's a pressure point that can still be applied." The room got quieter. Ryu looked at the Incheon contact with the expression of a man reconsidering a professional association. "That's not something I'm prepared to—" "I'm not suggesting anything," the Incheon contact said mildly. "I'm identifying variables. There's a difference." He stood, which signaled that the meeting was over in a way that left no room for debate. "Find out where she went. Don't contact her. Just find out." He looked at Han. "And tell me the moment those Incheon account anomalies go to analysis." He left. Han and Ryu sat in the room that smelled like recycled air and quiet calculation. "He already knows about the anomalies," Ryu said. "Yes," Han said. "Then he's the one who created them." Han said nothing, which was, for Han Byung-soo, a comprehensive answer. None of this reached Jae-hyun on the 14th floor. Not that day, not the day after. The organization had layers that existed specifically to insulate the top from the noise of its own machinery, and those layers were working exactly as designed, with the minor complication that some of the machinery was now running on instructions that had not come from the top. What did reach him on the 6th day of the 4th week was a name. He was in a meeting with his legal team reviewing exposure assessments when Woo-jin came in without knocking, which he never did, and set a single printed page on the table in front of him without explanation. Jae-hyun looked at it. Then he looked at Woo-jin. "Where did this come from?" "The Incheon audit." Woo-jin's voice was neutral with effort. "Choi found a secondary routing sequence buried in the February transfers. The account the money cycled through before it hit the flagged accounts." He paused. "It traces back to a shell company registered in Macau in 2021. The registered director is a nominee, but the beneficial owner, Yoon Sera," Jae-hyun said. The name sat in the room. The legal team shifted. Two of them had been in this business long enough to know that name and what it meant. The third was young enough that he would learn shortly. Yoon Sera was 44 years old and ran what the Korean business press called an investment consortium, and what everyone in the room actually understood to be a controlled nexus of overseas criminal capital that had been attempting, with patience and considerable funding, to establish a foothold in the domestic landscape that Jae-hyun's organization currently occupied. She was careful, well-resourced, and connected to factions in 3 countries whose cooperation she had secured through methods that did not appear in any official documentation. She had also, at various points over the past 2 years, attempted to establish what she described as strategic dialogue with Jae-hyun's organization, and had been declined each time with the kind of polite finality that was understood in their world to mean permanently closed. "She built the frame," Woo-jin said quietly. "The communication logs we received, the audio recording, the financial trail that looked like Amara was feeding the investigators." He stopped. "It was Sera's team, all of it." Jae-hyun did not move. The room waited. He was looking at the paper on the table but not reading it anymore. He had stopped reading it approximately 4 words in, when enough of the pattern had become clear that the rest was just confirmation of something his body had already registered before his mind had finished processing it. He thought about the audio recording he'd listened to 3 times in this very building, in a room 2 floors below this one, with Han and Woo-jin and the head of his security. He had listened to what sounded like Amar's voice, the cadence of it, the specific way she said certain words, describing the organization's Inchin accounts to someone on the other end of the call. He had been so certain. The certainty had felt like clarity. It had felt like the kind of brutal, clear-eyed realism that had kept him alive and operational for 15 years. He had told himself that the capacity to face an unpleasant truth without flinching was a form of strength. He understood now that it was the most expensive mistake he had ever made. "How long?" he said. His voice was very quiet. "We think the groundwork started about 8 months ago," Woo-jin said. She needed time to build the audio fabrication convincingly enough to pass 2 analysts. The financial routing took even longer. It was designed to look like something that had been going on for a year. 8 months. While Amara was living in their penthouse, while she was making him coffee and asking about his cases and pressing her palm flat against his back when he woke from the nightmares he would never admit to having. While she was, he now understood, carrying his child, a fact she had not yet told him, a fact she had apparently been building toward telling him the very night he had decided without asking her that she was a traitor. Yoon Sera had built a lie over 8 months, and he had believed it in 40 minutes. "Get out," he said. The legal team stood immediately and filed out with the practiced efficiency of people who had learned to read a room correctly. The door closed. Woo-jin stayed. "I said get out." "No," Woo-jin said. The word landed in the room with a particular quality. Woo-jin was not a man given to dramatic moments. He had worked 7 years for Kang Jae-hyun by being useful, reliable, and rarely surprising. The fact that he was still standing in the room, hands clasped in front of him, face absolutely steady, was its own kind of statement. Jae-hyun looked at him. "We need to talk about what you do next," Woo-jin said. "I'm aware of that. You're going to want to move immediately against Sera. I understand that. I'm telling you, before you make that call, that she anticipated it. She has structures in place." He paused. "She didn't just want to damage your marriage. She wanted to destabilize you specifically enough that your first response to finding out the truth would be emotional rather than strategic. She's waiting for you to come at her fast and angry." "I'm not angry," Jae-hyun said. It was the calmest he had sounded in 4 weeks. Woo-jin found it deeply alarming. "That's worse," Woo-jin said carefully. "She manufactured evidence to destroy my marriage, and my wife believed I chose my empire over her because I did exactly that." He stood. "Whether or not she anticipated my response is irrelevant. What she did has consequences." "And Amara?" The name. Out loud. In this room, from someone else's mouth. Jae-hyun turned toward the window. Seoul stretched out below in the afternoon light, gray and enormous and completely indifferent. He had always liked that about this city, the scale of it, the way it made individual problems feel appropriately small. It wasn't working today. "I need to find her," he said. "She doesn't want to be found." "I know. If you send people looking for her and she finds out, I'm not sending people. He turned back. I'm going to handle Sarah first. Carefully. The way you're describing. He looked at Wu Jin with an expression that was difficult to read and easy to fear. And then I'm going to find her myself. Wu Jin held his gaze for a moment. She's been gone for 4 weeks, Jae-hyun. Whatever she's built in that time, wherever she is, she built it to be away from this. From all of this. Including you. I know that too. Then you understand that finding her might make things worse, not better. What I understand, Jae-hyun said, and his voice had the particular quality of someone choosing words with the care of a man who has stopped having anything to lose, is that I threw away the only person who ever saw me as something other than a function of this organization, based on a lie. And she was carrying my child when I did it. He stopped. There is no version of my life where I do not try to correct that, whatever the outcome. Wu Jin was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, the Incheon anomalies. Han Byung-soo knows we found them. He knew before I brought you the report. Jae-hyun went still. He's been in contact with Sarah's people, Wu Jin said. I think he's been in contact for a while. He paused. The organization isn't just under threat from outside. We have a problem inside the walls. The two things landed together. The truth about Amara, the betrayal inside the organization, and Jae-hyun stood in the middle of it and felt the architecture of everything he had built over 15 years begin to shift beneath him in ways he could not yet fully calculate. He had spent his entire adult life constructing something that could withstand any attack from the outside. He had not sufficiently accounted for the ones that came from within. Call a senior council meeting for tomorrow morning, he said. Full attendance, no exceptions. If Han is compromised, a council meeting gives him advance notice of whatever you're planning. Yes, Jae-hyun said. Wu Jin waited. It does, Jae-hyun said again, and something in his tone made the implication clear, that this was not an oversight but a design, that he intended Han to know something was coming without knowing exactly what form it would take, that what looked like a tactical vulnerability was being used as a trigger. Wu Jin nodded slowly. And Sarah? Tonight, Jae-hyun said. I want everything we have on her movement in the last 8 months on my desk by 9. He turned back to the window. Somewhere outside this city, in a direction and at a distance he did not yet know, Amara was living a life she had built in the 4 weeks since he had destroyed the one they'd had together. She was doing it alone. She was doing it while carrying something he had not known existed and could not stop thinking about now that he did. He pressed one hand flat against the glass of the window, and for just a moment, one moment, unseen, his forehead dropped forward until it rested against the cold surface. Then he straightened up. He had a war to end before he could go looking for the only thing that mattered enough to end it for. The senior council meeting was scheduled for 9 in the morning. Han Byung-soo arrived at 8:45. Jae-hyun noted this from the security feed on his phone while standing in the basement level of the Gangnam building, watching 2 of his most trusted field operatives finish setting up the secondary conference room that no one on the council knew existed. Han arriving early meant one of 2 things. Either he was nervous and compensating with punctuality, or he had been tipped off about something specific and was attempting to read the room before the meeting officially began. Neither possibility was reassuring. Wu Jin appeared at Jae-hyun's shoulder. Ryu just arrived. Song is 10 minutes out. Han is currently in the main conference room making calls. To who? Still working on that. Wu Jin paused. He used his personal phone, not the building line. We can't pull it in real time. Jae-hyun handed back the phone without looking away from the equipment being arranged on the table in front of him. 3 laptops, 2 external drives, a portable projector, and an audio playback device that had been delivered to the building at 6 that morning by a courier Wu Jin had used exactly once before and trusted precisely because of how infrequently he was used. The recording is verified, Jae-hyun said. 3 independent analysts. Different firms, no contact between them. All 3 confirmed the same thing. The audio submitted as evidence against Amara was digitally constructed. Composite of her actual voice samples taken from phone calls over a 14-month period. Wu Jin kept his voice even and professional, which Jae-hyun understood was a courtesy. The construction is exceptional. Without knowing what to look for, the first 2 analysts we originally used had no reason to flag it. And Sarah's account. The Macau shell is one of 6.
The others route through Singapore, the Caymans, and two domestic subsidiaries that appear unrelated on paper. Choi mapped the full network last night. He set a folder on the table. It goes back further than 8 months. The groundwork started 2 years ago.
She was building toward this from the day you declined her first approach. 2 years. Jae-hyun picked up the folder, opened it, looked at the first page for approximately 4 seconds, then set it back down. He had read the full version at 3 in the morning. He didn't need to read it again. He needed to stand here for another 90 seconds and make sure the thing happening in his chest, the thing that had no useful tactical name, but that had been building since Woo Jin laid that first page on the conference table yesterday afternoon, did not become visible to the men upstairs before he was ready for it to be. "The penthouse," he said. "The search team finished at midnight." Woo Jin's voice changed slightly. "Not much. Enough. You were right about the secondary drawer in the bedroom wardrobe. There was a folder inside a zippered pocket in one of her bags she left behind." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a smaller envelope, the kind used for personal documents, slightly crumpled at one corner in a way that suggested it had been handled more than once since it was found. Jae-hyun took it. He did not open it yet. "Medical documents," Woo Jin said quietly. "From a clinic in Mapogu. Dated 6 weeks before—" He stopped. Recalibrated. "Before the night you asked her to sign the papers." 6 weeks. She had known for 6 weeks before that night. She had been living with that information, in their apartment, beside him, for 6 weeks. She had been— He could reconstruct it now with a clarity that felt like something being pressed directly into an open wound, waiting for the right moment, building toward the right conversation, trying to find a version of "I'm pregnant" that wouldn't feel like leverage or pressure or a complication in the operational calculus of a man whose entire architecture was built on calculated risk. She had been trying to find a moment that felt safe. And the night she had finally decided to tell him, he had put divorce papers on the table first. He put the envelope in his inside jacket pocket, against his chest, and left it there. "Let's go," he said. The council room on the 14th floor had 8 chairs around a rectangular table, a window that overlooked the street below, and the particular atmosphere of a room where consequential things had been decided for going on a decade. Jae-hyun had run hundreds of meetings in this room. He had a sense of its rhythms, the way sound moved in it, the particular quality of attention that assembled itself when the 8 chairs were filled. This morning, 4 chairs were filled. Han, Ryu, Song, the head of security operations, and Park Dae-sung, the organization's senior legal counsel, a man whose primary attribute was the ability to remain expressionless through revelations that would hospitalize a less disciplined person. They stood when Jae-hyun entered. They always stood. He had never asked them to. It had simply become the custom, the way certain behaviors calcified into ritual around a particular kind of authority. He gestured for them to sit. He did not sit himself. "I'll keep this brief," he said. "Last night our financial team completed an audit that traces the evidence used to establish malfeasance on the part of my former wife directly to a fabrication operation coordinated by Yoon Se-ra's consortium using shell account infrastructure established over the past 2 years. He paused. "The evidence was manufactured. The accusation was false. The marriage was destroyed on the basis of a frame." The room was quiet. Han Byung-soo's face was extraordinary in its stillness. Ryu's was less controlled, a micro-expression of something that passed across it and was suppressed. Song and Park were watching Jae-hyun with the focused attention of men trying to understand the shape of what was coming before it arrived. "I want to be precise about what this means operationally," Jae-hyun continued. "It means that someone with access to enough of our internal communication to build a credible fabrication has been working within our network for at minimum 2 years. It means the exposure isn't just external, and it means we have an immediate problem that I am going to address this morning." He looked at Han. Han looked back at him. The stillness in his face was the specific kind that comes not from having nothing to react to, but from having decided, in advance, not to react to anything. Jae-hyun had seen that face across interrogation tables. He knew exactly what it meant. "Han," he said, "tell me about the Macau account." A beat, 2 beats. "I don't know what account you're referring to," Han said. The words were so clean, so completely without hesitation or inflection. 61 years of practice producing a sentence that technically qualified as speech while conveying precisely nothing. The Daesung capital account registered in Macau in 2000. The one that appears as an intermediary node in the fabrication routing. Chae-Hyun tilted his head very slightly. You authorized 2 transfers into that account in March of last year. I have the internal authorization codes. This was a partial truth. He had 1 authorization code, not 2, and its provenance was still being confirmed. But partial truths, deployed at the right moment with enough confidence, had a reliable tendency to produce more complete information than the original partial truth contained. Han said, any authorization with my codes would require Byung-Soo. Jae-Hyun's voice dropped a register. Not louder, quieter. The kind of quiet that required the room to reorganize itself around it. We've worked together for 9 years. Do not make me do this in a way that neither of us will enjoy. The room held itself very still. Han's right hand, resting on the table, moved. A small movement, the fingers adjusting against the surface, almost imperceptible. Chae-Hyun caught it. Song caught it. Park was already writing something very small and contained in the margin of his legal pad. I was approached 18 months ago, Han said. His voice was the same, his face was the same, but something behind both of them had made a decision, and the decision was apparently to stop expending energy on maintenance. By an intermediary representing Seira's consortium. The initial conversation was framed as a consultation regarding certain regulatory exposures the organization was facing. And you didn't bring this to me. The consultation was about your exposures, Jae-Hyun, not the organization's. Han looked at him steadily. Sarah's people had documentation indicating you had been approached by federal investigators 18 months ago regarding the Busan port contracts, not Amara, you. The air in the room changed. They had fabricated that documentation as well, Han continued, or at least I understand now that they may have. At the time, the documentation was persuasive. They told me that your federal exposure was significant enough to destabilize the organization, and that a change in leadership structure, managed carefully, was in the long-term interest of everyone who depended on its stability. He paused. They presented it as protecting the organization from a compromised leader. They told you I was working with investigators, Jae-Hyun said. They provided what appeared to be evidence. And you believed it. I believed it the way you believed the evidence about Amara. Han's voice finally had something in it. Not quite defiance, not quite shame. Something that was attempting to be both and landing as neither. Quickly, without asking. The parallel landed in the room like a stone dropped into very cold water. Chae-Hyun stared at the man who had managed his organization's finances for 9 years. He thought about the specific shape of what had just happened. That Sarah had not run 1 frame. She had run 2, simultaneously, one aimed at Jae-Hyun's marriage and one aimed at his inner council, each designed to be plausible, each constructed to make the target feel like they were responding to evidence rather than being manipulated by it. She had turned him and his most trusted financial mind against each other, using the same playbook applied in opposite directions. The elegance of it was genuinely nauseating. Who else? Jae-Hyun said. I don't know. Who else did they approach? I told you, I don't. Han. The word had a specific quality. Final, in the way of a door being closed permanently rather than slammed. I have been awake for approximately 31 hours. I have found out in the last 18 of them that I destroyed my marriage based on fabricated evidence, that my wife was pregnant when I threw her out of our home, and that my financial director has been in contact with the people who orchestrated this for 18 months without telling me. I am, he paused, not in a generous frame of mind. Tell me who else. The silence stretched for 4 seconds. Ryu had a conversation, Han said. Early on, I don't believe it went further than a conversation. Ryu, to his credit, did not attempt to deny it. He looked at the table and said, They approached me about a potential transition framework. I told them I wasn't interested and I didn't report it because he stopped. Because I didn't want to be the person who brought that kind of information into this room. You didn't report a hostile approach to the organization because it was inconvenient, Jae-Hyun said. Ryu said nothing. Nothing. Song. Jae-Hyun looked at his head of security. I need the building on lockdown as of 5 minutes ago. Han stays in this room. Ryu stays in this room. He looked at Park. I need you to start documenting everything Han just said. Verbatim, time-stamped, signed. He looked back at the window. And I need someone to tell me where Sarah is right now. Wu Jin, who had been standing near the door throughout the entire exchange, said, She's in Seoul. Arrived last night from Singapore. She's staying at the Lotte Hotel in Junggu under a business alias we just matched this morning. Jae-hyun turned to look at him. I was going to tell you when the meeting was done, Wu Jin said, with the mild expression of a man who had anticipated the general trajectory of the morning. She's not hiding. She's here because she expected you to find out about the fabrication around this time. Her presence is deliberate. She wants a meeting, Jae-hyun said. She sent a message through an intermediary at 7 this morning. She's requesting a conversation. Wu Jin paused. Her word was conversation, not negotiation, not discussion, conversation. The word, in context, had the quality of a thing being said by someone who believed they had already won and was now prepared to be magnanimous about it. Jae-hyun looked around the room, at Han with his extraordinary stillness, at Ryu staring at the table, at Song standing at the door with the controlled expression of a man sorting rapidly through contingency plans, at Park's pen moving steadily across his legal pad. He had spent 15 years building an organization that was supposed to be impenetrable. He had spent those 15 years being certain that the threats to what he'd built were external, rival factions, regulatory pressure, the slow institutional machinery of law enforcement. He had constructed walls in every direction that mattered, and had not, he understood now with complete clarity, adequately accounted for the interior. Because the interior felt like trust, and he had treated trust as a structural given, rather than something that required maintenance and verification and the occasional willingness to look at the people you depended on and ask, really ask, whether the things they were telling you were true. The same error. In two directions, at two different scales. Tell her I'll meet her, he said. This afternoon, location of my choosing. She'll want to vet the location. She can want whatever she likes. He moved toward the door. Make sure Han is comfortable. He's going to be here for a while, Han said from behind him. Jae-hyun. He stopped. Didn't. I wasn't wrong that you'd become a liability, Han said. The words were quiet and carried no particular malice. They had the tone of something a person says because they've decided they have nothing more to lose by honesty. The organization needed stability. Sarah convinced me that a managed transition was better than a collapse. I made a calculation. Jae-hyun stood in the doorway for a moment. So did I, he said, about Amara. We were both wrong. He left. The Lotte Hotel meeting happened at 2 in the afternoon in a private dining room that Jae-hyun's team had swept twice and that Sarah's security had swept once after them, a procedural dance that both sides understood as theater rather than actual precaution. Real precautions were invisible. Yoon Sera was already seated when Jae-hyun arrived. She was exactly what her reputation suggested, composed in the way of someone who had decided, at some point in their 30s, to make composure a professional instrument rather than a natural state. She wore a charcoal suit and no jewelry except a watch, and she looked at Jae-hyun when he entered with the particular expression of a person who has been looking forward to a conversation. Jae-hyun sat down across from her without preamble. She said, "You look tired." "You look like someone who expected this meeting to be more difficult to arrange," he said. "What do you want?" "I want to have a conversation." "You said that. What does the conversation accomplish for you?" She tilted her head slightly. Up close, she had the quality of someone who processed information faster than they let on, absorbing his posture, his tone, the specific way he was holding himself, and filing all of it in real time. "I want you to understand that what I did to your marriage was not personal. It was highly personal. It was designed to be personal. It was designed to be effective. The fact that it required personal mechanisms to achieve effectiveness doesn't make it personal." She folded her hands on the table. "You declined my approaches 3 times. The legitimate routes were closed. I needed you destabilized enough to create an opening. Your marriage was the most efficient vector because it was the only thing you had that you hadn't armored. You destroyed my wife's life to create an opening for a business negotiation. I created conditions that I anticipated would be temporary," she said. My expectation was that the destabilization would make you more receptive to partnership conversations within a certain time frame. I did not anticipate that you would be quite as, she paused, chose carefully, absolute in your response. You expected me to be hurt and angry. You didn't expect me to throw her out. A fractional shift in her expression. The first one. No, she said. I expected you to investigate, to bring your wife in and ask her to explain the evidence, to create a period of domestic tension and mutual suspicion that would make you, temporarily, less stable and less certain in your decisions. She looked at him directly. I did not engineer a divorce. You made that choice yourself. The words landed with the specific weight of a true thing said by someone who had no particular interest in your comfort. Jae-hyun looked at her across the table and felt something extremely cold moving through him, because she was not wrong, and they both knew it, and the fact that she was saying it to his face was not an expression of guilt or discomfort, but of leverage. She was telling him that the worst part of what had happened was his own action, and she was telling him this because she understood that a man who knew the worst thing he'd done was his own doing was easier to work with than a man who could locate his pain entirely in someone else. What do you actually want? He said. A merger. She said it the way someone says something they've been waiting to say for 2 years. Clean, simple, no elaboration required. Not a hostile acquisition, not a subordinate arrangement. An equal partnership. Your domestic infrastructure and established relationships, my international capital and network reach. Together we build something neither of us can build separately. And if I decline, then I use the information I've accumulated about your federal exposures over the past 18 months, the real information, not the fabrication I used against Han, to make things considerably more complicated for you. She said it without threat in her voice, the way you state a logistical fact. I'd prefer not to. It's inefficient, and it moves us both backward. But I'm capable of it. Jae-hyun was quiet for a long moment. The dining room around them was entirely still. No staff, the doors closed, the city outside the window going about its afternoon with complete indifference. I need 48 hours, he said. She studied him. To decide. To review the terms I assume you've prepared. Something that was almost approval moved across her face. She reached into the bag beside her chair and produced a thin document. 12 pages, he noted, clean formatting, no intermediary letterhead, and set it on the table between them. 48 hours, she said. The offer changes materially after that. He took the document without looking at it. The audio fabrication. I want the original source files and the names of the technical team. That's not part of the merger terms. It is now. She looked at him with an expression that recalculated something. Why? Because my wife is somewhere in this country thinking she married a man who chose his empire over her. And because our child is going to be born in a few months to a mother who believes she was thrown out by someone who never trusted her. He set the document on the table. The source files and the technical team are what I need to prove to her, concretely, that the evidence was fabricated. That what happened was not her failure. It was mine, but it was also yours. He looked at Sarah steadily. That's not negotiable. The room was quiet. Sarah looked at him for a long time. Whatever she was calculating it carefully. Finally, she said, You already know she's pregnant. Yes. And she doesn't know you know. Correct. So your plan is to find her, show her the proof, and... She stopped. For the first time in the entire conversation, something in her expression that was not purely strategic appeared. It wasn't guilt. It was closer to the expression of someone who has just understood that the game they were playing had been sitting on top of something real, and that the real thing has weight. You're not going to accept the merger. He said nothing. You're sitting here getting information about your wife and child, and you're planning to use whatever time you have left running this organization to dismantle the threats to her before you. She stopped again. What are you planning to do? I'm planning to correct every mistake I've made, he said, in order. Starting with the one I made the night I put papers on a table without asking the woman I loved whether a single word of the accusation was true. Sarah looked at him across the table, and for just a moment, one moment only, the composed professional architecture of her face showed something underneath it. Not sympathy, something older and less negotiable than sympathy. Recognition, maybe, of the specific kind of damage that happens when a person finally understands what they've done. The merger offer, she said quietly. If you walk away from this, I know what happens if I walk away from this, Jae-hyun said. I've known since yesterday afternoon. He stood, leaving the document on the table. The source files. By tonight. Otherwise, the information I compiled on your Singapore and Cayman structures goes to 3 separate regulatory bodies before you land at your next destination. He left. Outside the hotel, Seoul moved around him in the gray afternoon light. Taxis and pedestrians, and the low percussion of a city that had never once arranged itself around the particular dramas happening inside it. He stood on the pavement for a moment, hands in his jacket pockets, the envelope from the penthouse still against his chest. He had approximately 48 hours before Sarah recalibrated and came at him from an angle he hadn't anticipated. He had a compromised financial director sitting in a locked conference room. He had an organization that had been penetrated at multiple levels by someone who had studied it for 2 years and understood its architecture better than most of its own members. And somewhere south of here, in a place no one in his network had yet located, Amara Bennett was living a life she'd built with her own hands, carrying a child she intended to raise without him, in a world she had carefully constructed to have no door he could walk through. He understood, a very limited window to do a very large number of things correctly. He had not, in recent history, demonstrated a reliable capacity for that. He started walking. The source files arrived at 11 that night. Woo Jin brought them personally, a single encrypted drive in a plain envelope, no note, no documentation of the handoff. Sarah had complied, which told Jae-hyun 2 things. She believed the Singapore threat was credible, and she had already decided that the merger conversation was not, in fact, over. She was giving him the files the way someone gives a man enough rope, watching to see what he did with it. He didn't sleep. He sat in the basement office with Choi and a forensic audio specialist Woo Jin had pulled from a university contact, a woman named Dr. Shin, who wore glasses and spoke in precise, measured sentences, and had spent the first 10 minutes establishing very clearly that she preferred not to know the operational context of what she was analyzing. Then she looked at the files for 4 hours and produced a written technical report that broke down, in language clean enough to be understood by anyone without a technical background, exactly how Amara's voice had been taken apart and reassembled into something that had never been said. 14 months of phone calls. The fabrication team had used calls Amara made to suppliers, to her family in the States, to friends she'd maintained from before Seoul. They had isolated phonemes, reconstructed cadence, layered the ambient acoustic signatures of locations she frequented. The result had been, Dr. Shin used the word sophisticated 3 times in 4 pages, which in the context of a person that precise was the equivalent of anyone else saying extraordinary. Jae-hyun read the report twice. Then he had it printed, signed by Dr. Shin with her institutional credentials, and sealed into a second envelope that he put with the first one, against his chest, inside his jacket. He was carrying a significant amount of paper against his chest these days. He was aware of the irony. He had put papers on a table to end his marriage. He was now accumulating papers to try to correct what that had cost. At 4 a.m, Woo Jin sat down across from him with 2 cups of coffee, and the expression of a man who had something to say and was choosing his moment. Say it, Jae-hyun said. She's on Jeju, Woo Jin said. Small coastal town on the eastern side. She's working at a cafe near the waterfront. She's been there for about 5 weeks. Jae-hyun wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. The ceramic was hot enough to be uncomfortable. He held it anyway. How long have you known? He said. 48 hours. I didn't want to tell you until you'd handled Sierra. Woo Jin paused. She's registered under a different name. The cafe owner knows her as Mia. She's healthy. He stopped. Recalibrated. She looks like someone who is doing the hard work of building something new and is further along than you'd expect in 5 weeks. Jae-hyun was quiet. She's strong, Woo Jin said. It was not a consolation. It was a fact, said with something close to admiration. I know she is. He set down the coffee. Sarah's people, do they have this information? Not yet, but the window is short. She made inquiries about Jeju property rental records 2 days ago through a proxy. She's looking. The timeline compressed immediately in Jae-hyun's mind, the way it always did when a variable shifted from theoretical to operational. Sarah had given him the source files as a gesture of provisional goodwill, but she was simultaneously running her own locator process. Whether she intended to use that information as leverage in a renegotiated merger conversation or as something more direct, he didn't know. He knew she was capable of both. "I'm going to Jeju," he said. "I know. I'm going alone." Woojin said nothing for a moment. Then, "That's not wise." "Probably not." Jaehyun stood. "While I'm gone, I need you to do something that is going to feel like the wrong decision until it doesn't." He looked at Woojin steadily. "Contact the federal task force that has been building the Inchin case, the case they've been building against us." He watched Woojin's face go very still. "I want to talk to them." The silence that followed was the longest of the night. "You want to," Woojin started, stopped. "You want to voluntarily contact the investigators." "I want to give them Seira," Jae-hyun said, "the Singapore accounts, the Cayman structures, the complete fabrication operation, including the technical team, the source files, and Han's documented cooperation. I want to give them everything they need to dismantle her network across 3 jurisdictions." He paused. "In exchange for a conversation about the terms of our own exposure." Woojin stared at him. "That's not a conversation. That's a negotiated surrender." "Yes." "Jae-hyun." Woojin's voice shifted into something rawer than his usual register. "If you do this, if you open that door, there is no closing it. The organization doesn't survive federal cooperation. The alliances, the protected accounts, the operational infrastructure, all of it gets exposed in the discovery process. Everything you've built for 15 years. "I know what it means." "Then you understand that you're talking about ending everything." "I'm talking about ending the right things," Jae-hyun said, "before someone else ends everything else." He picked up his jacket. "And I'm talking about being able to look at my child someday without the knowledge that I chose an empire over their mother sitting somewhere behind my eyes every time I look at them." He put the jacket on, set up the contact, carefully. "Through Park. He has the right channels, and he's been clean through this entire thing." Woojin sat with both hands around his coffee cup, and the expression of a man who had 7 years of loyalty being asked to hold something almost too heavy to carry. "Okay," he said finally. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Go to Jeju." Woojin looked up at him. "And Jae-hyun, she doesn't know you're coming." "I know." "She might not—" "I know," he said again. "I'm not going to ask for anything. I'm going to give her the proof and tell her the truth, and then whatever she decides—" He stopped. The sentence didn't have an ending he was willing to say out loud at 4 a.m. in a basement office. "Just set up the contact." He left. The first ferry to Jeju departed at 6:45. He took it. He stood at the stern for most of the crossing, hands on the rail, the yellow sea dark and cold around the boat, the mainland lights fading behind him, and the island still invisible ahead. The wind was sharp enough to hurt. He let it. He had been on this water before, operational reasons, years ago. A problem that had required his personal attention and been resolved in ways he preferred not to detail. He had not thought of Jeju as a place a person might choose to heal in. He was revising that assessment. The island appeared gradually, the way islands do. A darkening of the horizon that became a shape that became a coastline. By the time the ferry docked, it was mid-morning, and the light had that particular coastal quality, clear and slightly brutal, that strips away the atmospheric softening you get inland and shows you things exactly as they are. He rented a car from an agency near the port using a card Woojin had arranged. He had the address of the cafe from the locator information, a place called Henyo Blue on a street 2 blocks from the eastern waterfront, known locally, according to the brief notes Woojin's contact had compiled, for good coffee and a kitchen that ran until 3 in the afternoon. He drove. The island roads were narrow, and the landscape was severe and beautiful in a way that felt appropriate. And he drove through it with both hands on the wheel and the 2 envelopes in his jacket, and a rehearsed version of what he was going to say that he already understood was almost certainly not what he was actually going to say. He parked a block from the cafe. He sat in the car for 4 minutes. Then he got out. Through the window of Henyo Blue, he could see her before she could see him. She was behind the counter, moving between the espresso machine and a shelf of cups with the particular efficiency of someone who has learned a physical routine well enough that it no longer requires full attention, which meant her attention was elsewhere, in some internal space he had no access to. She had tied her hair back.
She was wearing a dark green apron over a cream sweater. She was visibly, undeniably pregnant, the fullness of it unmistakable even through the fabric of the sweater, and the sight of it hit him in the sternum like a physical impact. He had known. Wu Jin had confirmed it. He had been carrying the medical documents for days. Knowing and seeing were two entirely different things, and he stood on the pavement outside a small coastal cafe on Jeju Island and felt the full distance between them. He pushed the door open. The bell above it chimed. She didn't look up immediately. She was finishing a pour, focused on the cup, and when she finally lifted her eyes to the new customer, her expression went through three things in approximately 1 second: recognition, disbelief, and something so complex and layered that he couldn't name it before it was replaced by a careful, closed blankness that was worse than any of them. "Amara," he said. She set the cup down on the counter with a precision that looked like the effort it was. She looked at him across the small space of the cafe. 3 other customers, a young woman at a corner table, 2 older men near the window, none of them paying attention. And when she spoke, her voice was very even. "How did you find me?" "I had help." He stopped a few feet inside the door. He hadn't moved further in because the space between them felt like something that required her permission before he entered it.
I'm sorry for coming without warning. I didn't know how to warn you without giving you the chance to leave. Yes. Smart. The word was flat. Not cruel exactly. More like a woman who has spent 5 weeks building a wall and has just seen a crack appear in it and is deciding, in real time, whether to shore it up or let it be. What do you want, Jae-hyun? Can we talk? We're talking. Somewhere that isn't... He glanced at the other customers. She studied him for a moment. Her jaw was set in the way he remembered from every confrontation they'd ever had. Not stubbornness, exactly, but the particular quality of a person who has decided to remain present in a situation they would prefer to leave. It was a form of courage that he had always, privately, admired about her, even when it was directed at him. She untied her apron. 15 minutes, she said to the young woman at the corner table, apparently a colleague who looked up with an expression caught between curiosity and concern. I'll be out back. There was a small courtyard behind the cafe, concrete, a wooden table, 2 chairs, a potted plant that was doing moderately well in the coastal weather. She came out through the back door and stood near the table without sitting, arms crossed, and looked at him with the expression of a woman who has prepared herself for something difficult and is not planning to make it easy. "You look well," he said. It was the wrong thing to say, and he knew it the moment it left his mouth. "Don't." Her voice was quiet and absolute. "Don't do that. Say what you came to say." He reached into his jacket. He took out both envelopes and set them on the wooden table between them. "The first one," he said, "is the technical report from a forensic audio analyst. It documents how the recording we were given, the one we believed was you talking to federal investigators, was constructed from 14 months of your personal phone calls, fabricated, every word of it." He watched her face. "The second envelope has the financial documentation tracing the fabrication operation back to its source. A woman named Yoon Sarah, whose network has been attempting to move into our territory for 2 years. He paused. "The evidence against you was manufactured, Amara, all of it. There was never any real accusation. There was only a very sophisticated lie." She didn't move. The wind off the water moved through the courtyard. Somewhere in the distance, a gull called and went quiet. She looked at the envelopes on the table. She did not pick them up. Her arms were still crossed, and she was very still in the way of a person who has just had something land on them that they need a moment to process before they can respond. 5 weeks, she said finally. Her voice had changed. Not softer, but more unsteady. Like something underneath the careful blankness was beginning to push against it. "I have been here for 5 weeks believing..." She stopped. "I signed those papers because I thought you chose your empire over me." "I know. I thought you believed it. I thought you looked at that evidence and chose it over 3 years of..." She stopped again. Her hand moved, involuntary, a reflex, to rest against her stomach, and he saw it, and the seeing of it did something to his face that he couldn't control. She noticed. "You know?" "Yes." "How long?" 4 days. He held her gaze. "There was a folder in the penthouse. In your bag. The documents from the Mapo clinic." He paused. I'm sorry I found them the way I did and not the way you intended. Her eyes were bright. She was not going to cry in front of him. He could see that decision operating, the specific discipline of a person who has decided in advance not to give someone the satisfaction of their tears, and then encountering a situation where the tears have their own agenda. You came here to tell me it was a lie, she said. Yes. And now I'm supposed to… what? Feel better. Understand. No. He said it quietly. I came here because you deserve to know the truth, and because you deserve to have it from me. He kept his hands at his sides. He wanted, badly, to move toward her. He didn't. What happened that night wasn't only Sarah's lie. I made choices. I chose not to ask you. I chose to believe the evidence over 3 years of knowing you, and that… He stopped. The words felt inadequate in the way that words usually did when you were trying to use them to cover the distance between an action and its damage. That was mine. Not hers. Mine. She looked at him. The brightness in her eyes hadn't resolved. Her hand was still on her stomach. I'm dismantling it, he said. The organization. I've already started. I'm giving the federal task force everything they need to close out the exposure, ours and Sarah's. I'm cooperating. He watched her process this. I'm not asking you to factor that into anything. I'm telling you because you spent 3 years in that world keeping my secrets, and you deserve to know that the secrets are ending. A long silence. From inside the cafe, faintly, the sound of the espresso machine. You're going to prison, she said. It wasn't a question. Probably. Probably, she repeated, with a quality in her voice that might, in a different moment, have been something close to bitter humor. You built an empire for 15 years and you're probably going to prison. Yes. She looked at him for a long time. He let her look. He had no more information to give, no more envelopes to produce, no more revelations that would change the shape of what had happened. He had the truth laid out on a wooden table in a coastal courtyard, and he was standing on the other side of it, and the distance between them was still, for now, exactly what it had been. Then behind him, the courtyard door opened, and Woo Jin's voice said, Jae-hyun, with a tone that Jae-hyun had heard exactly twice before in 7 years, and both times it had meant something had gone wrong in a direction and at a speed that required immediate action. He turned. Woo Jin was at the door, phone in hand, face stripped of everything except urgency. Sarah's people found her first, he said, 20 minutes ago. 2 vehicles, 4 men. They've been in position around the block since this morning. He held Jae-hyun's gaze. They're not here to deliver a message. The air in the courtyard changed. Jae-hyun turned back to Amara. Her expression had shifted, not fear exactly, more like the expression of a woman who has spent 5 weeks building a peaceful life and has just understood that the world she came from has followed her into it, and that the 5 weeks of peace were always temporary, and that the anger she feels about this is enormous and completely useless. How many exits does this building have? Jae-hyun said. Front door and this one, she said. Her voice was steady. The kitchen. Does it have a window? Yes. It faces the alley on the north side. She paused. I'm not running. Amara, I'm 5 months pregnant, and I've been running for 5 weeks, and I'm done. She picked up the 2 envelopes from the table and held them against her chest. So, whatever you're going to do it. He looked at her for exactly 1 second. The woman he had thrown away was standing in a courtyard on a coastal island holding the evidence of her own innocence against her chest, visibly pregnant with his child, telling him she was not running, with the particular expression of a person who has been afraid and has decided to stop. He turned to Woo Jin. Get her to the kitchen, the north window, into the alley, then the waterfront. He was already moving toward the courtyard gate. How many do we have in position? 2. I have 2 more 10 minutes out. Sira's people, armed. Yes. Then we have 10 minutes to make this very uncomfortable for them before the reinforcements arrive. He looked back at Amara once. Just once. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't fully read at this distance, couldn't afford to try. Go with Woo Jin, please. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once. He pushed through the courtyard gate into the narrow street behind the cafe, and the afternoon light hit him, and the salt air hit him, and somewhere ahead, around the corner, 4 men who had been sent here by a woman who had spent 2 years dismantling his life were positioned on the streets of a quiet island town where Amara had come to build something clean. He had two men, one of whom was Woojin. He had no weapons beyond what his own body had learned over 41 years of surviving situations that were supposed to be unsurvivable. He had a 10-minute window before it got easier, and a lifetime of making the wrong decision before it got harder. He moved toward the corner. The first of Sierra's men was at the mouth of the street, a solid presence in a dark jacket, hands loose at his sides in the way of someone trained to look casual while being operational. He saw Jae-hyun at approximately the same moment Jae-hyun saw him. The moment before either of them moved had a particular quality: the held breath before something breaks, the last instant in which the world was still arranged the way it had been arranged a second before, in which all the choices were still theoretical. Then it broke. Jae-hyun was already moving before the man reached into his jacket, closing distance at an angle the other man hadn't accounted for, taking the inside line, and the next 40 seconds were a specific kind of controlled violence that had nothing clean or cinematic about it. It was close and brutal, and it hurt. A palm strike that sent shock up his own arm, an elbow that connected with something solid but not quite where he'd aimed, a grip on his jacket that spun him into a wall hard enough to drive the breath out of him in a grunt. He kept moving. You stopped moving, you lost. He put the first man down and moved. Down the side street, the second vehicle had opened, and two more of Sarah's men were on foot now, and Jae-hyun's remaining man, a compact, reliable operative named Baek, who had been with the organization for 4 years, appeared from behind a parked delivery truck at exactly the right moment and took the pressure off the angle, buying Jae-hyun 6 seconds he used to cover the distance to the waterfront. The problem was the fourth man, who Jae-hyun hadn't placed yet. He found out where the fourth man was when something hit him from behind. Not a weapon, a body check, a hard shoulder into the back of his left side that drove him off the sidewalk and into the low railing above the waterfront steps. The railing was old and it gave slightly, and he caught himself with both hands and felt the rust of it tear across his palms. He turned. The fourth man was bigger than the first three and moved with the specific economy of someone who'd done this considerably more than he had. The first exchange was brutal and brief, and Jae-hyun took a hit to the jaw that made his vision stripe white for half a second, long enough for the man to get a grip on his jacket lapel. He didn't try to break the grip. He pulled into it instead, inside the man's reach where the leverage went wrong, and drove a knee upward twice, fast, and the second one connected with something that changed the man's priorities immediately. Jae-hyun stepped back. His mouth tasted like copper. His hands were bleeding from the railing. He was breathing in short, controlled pulls through his nose because something on his left side was unhappy in a way that would demand attention later. Down the street, he could see the cafe's front door. He could see Woojin's vehicle, the engine running. He could not see Amara yet. He moved toward the vehicle at a pace that was faster than walking and slower than running, because running announced too much, and he was already conspicuous enough with blood on his hands and whatever was happening to his ribs, and he needed the next 40 seconds to look like a man with somewhere to be rather than a man who had just put 3 people on the ground. Woojin's car. Driver's door. He pulled it open and got in, and Woojin said from the back seat, "Don't bleed on the upholstery," and Amara, beside Woojin, was looking at him with an expression that had moved considerably past the careful blankness she'd maintained in the courtyard. She was looking at him with something raw and unresolved and complicated that he didn't have the time or the right to interpret yet. "Drive," Woojin told the operative in the front passenger seat. The car moved. Jae-hyun pressed the back of one bleeding hand against his mouth and looked at the island streets sliding past the window and thought about the 10 minutes he'd just lived through, the specific weight of the decision to step through that courtyard gate, the moment of choosing to put his body between what was coming and the woman he had failed. He thought about the 4 days between finding the medical documents and standing in that courtyard. He thought about all the things he had built over 15 years and all the things he had already begun to take apart, and the particular mathematics of what remained when you subtracted one from the other. Not much. A handful of days, maybe less. A chance that was not guaranteed and could not be negotiated into certainty. From the back seat, Amara said, very quietly, not looking at him, "Your hands. They're fine. They're bleeding." "I know." A silence. The car moved through the coastal streets. The water appeared between buildings in flashes, dark blue, cold, completely indifferent. Hyun. Her voice had changed again. All the careful architecture of it had given way to something underneath, something that had been 5 weeks in the building and had apparently hit a structural limit. Why did you come here yourself? He looked at his hands. The cuts were not deep, but they were not nothing. Because, he said, and stopped, and started again. Because the last time something important happened, I sent evidence. I believed documentation instead of looking at the person I knew. He kept his eyes on his hands. I wasn't going to make the same mistake in the other direction. The car moved. Beside him, not close but present, the particular presence of someone who is choosing to remain in a space rather than flee it. Amara was quiet for a long time. The island slid past. Somewhere behind them, Sarah's remaining people were recalibrating, regrouping, reporting back to a woman in a Seoul hotel room who was about to understand that the 48-hour window had closed in a direction she hadn't fully calculated. And Jae-hyun sat in the front seat of a moving car with bleeding hands and a rib that was going to be a problem by morning, carrying nothing now except what was already done and what might still, if he was careful and honest and much luckier than he deserved to be possible. The safe house was a rented room above a fishing supply store on the northern end of the island, arranged by Woo-jin's contact in the 40 minutes between leaving the cafe and arriving at the door. It smelled like salt and old wood and the particular mustiness of a space that was used occasionally and cared for just enough to remain functional. There were 2 rooms, a bathroom with questionable water pressure, and a window that looked out over a gravel lot toward the sea. Amara sat on the edge of the bed in the main room and did not speak while Woo-jin's operative, a quiet woman named Ji-eun, who had appeared from somewhere Jae-hyun hadn't tracked, and who carried a basic medical kit with the efficiency of someone accustomed to needing one, cleaned and wrapped his hands. It took 12 minutes. The cuts were not deep, but they were numerous, the kind of damage that looks worse than it is and takes longer to address than you want it to. His rib, as predicted, had become a problem. Not broken, Ji-eun assessed, but cracked possibly, bruised certainly, and the breathing that came with it was the shallow, carefully managed kind that costs you something with every pull. Amara watched all of this from the edge of the bed. She did not offer commentary. She did not look away. She watched with the expression of a woman who is processing a large number of things simultaneously and has not yet decided which of them she is ready to speak out loud. When Ji-eun was done, she packed up her kit and moved to the outer room with Woo-jin without being asked. The door didn't close all the way. Chae-hyun could hear, very faintly, Woo-jin's voice on a call, the specific cadence of someone managing multiple problems at distance. He was sitting in the room's single chair. His jacket was on the floor. His hands were wrapped in white gauze and his ribs hurt when he breathed, and his jaw had a bruise developing along the left side that he could feel more than see. "You should lie down," Amara said. "I'm fine." "You said that about your hands too." He looked at her. She was still in the green apron. She hadn't taken it off, and he wasn't sure if she'd noticed. Her hair had come partially loose from where she'd tied it. She was sitting with both hands in her lap, and her posture had none of the careful architecture it had carried in the courtyard. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had been tired for a long time and had been managing it well until about 2 hours ago. "Amara," he said. "Don't." Her voice was quiet. "Don't start with the apology. I know it's there. I can see you building toward it, and I need a minute before you do that." He closed his mouth. He nodded once. She looked at her hands. Outside, through the window, the light was shifting toward afternoon's end, going gold and low over the gravel lot. The sound of the sea was constant. The particular white noise of water that Jae-hyun had never lived near, and that Amara had apparently been sleeping beside for 5 weeks. "When I left Seoul," she said, without looking up, "I told myself I was done trying to understand you. I told myself the man I married was a construction, something I had imagined because I needed to believe it." She paused. "I spent 5 weeks convincing myself that the husband who sat with me for 3 hours in a hospital waiting room over a sprained wrist was the same man who put papers on a table without asking me a single question, that they were the same person, and I had simply refused to see it clearly." He said nothing. "I was almost there," she said. "Almost." The word came out with something rueful underneath it. "And then you walked through the door of my cafe. I'm sorry for that, for not warning you."
I know why you didn't. She looked up. If you'd warned me, I would have left. She held his gaze for a moment. I wouldn't have wanted to, but I would have. The honesty of it landed between them. The specific honesty of two people who know each other well enough to stop performing the easier version of things. The envelopes, he said. Have you read them? I read the technical report on this crossing. She had taken the ferry then, or arranged transport while they were in the car. He hadn't asked. 14 months of my phone calls. She said it quietly. Someone listened to 14 months of my conversations with my mother, with my friends, with the supplier I used for the apartment flowers. And they took all of that and built something out of it. She paused. I kept thinking about the calls with my mother, wondering which words she took. Whether my mother's voice is in there somewhere too, without her knowing. He hadn't thought about that. He thought about it now, and it hit him in a place that the physical damage of the afternoon hadn't reached. The second envelope, he said. I'll read it. She touched it where it lay beside her on the bed. I believe you that it's there. She paused. I believed you in the courtyard. I believed you the moment you said it, which made me... She stopped. It made me very angry, Jae-hyun, because I spent 5 weeks working very hard to stop believing in you, and you walked in and told me the truth and all of that work. She shook her head, not completing the sentence. I know. You don't get to say I know about this one. Her voice sharpened. Not quite anger, something adjacent to it, the edge of a feeling that had been contained too long in too small a space. You don't get to tell me you understand what it cost me to rebuild something from nothing, alone, while pregnant, in a place where no one knew my name because you put me there. With the best intentions in the world, she put me there with her lie, but you put me there with your choice. Yes, he said. I did. I needed you to ask me. The words came out differently than the others, slower, with more weight behind them, the weight of something that had been carried in a particular part of the chest for 5 weeks. That's what I keep coming back to. Everything else, the fabrication, Sarah, all of it. I can understand how it happened. Evidence is evidence, and you were trained your whole life to respond to evidence. But you didn't ask me. Her voice was steady, but it was steady the way a person is steady when they are using every available resource to remain so. After 3 years, you didn't ask. No, he said. I didn't. Why? The question had a specific quality. Not rhetorical, not accusatory, but genuinely open. She wanted to understand. After everything, she still wanted to understand the mechanics of it, the actual reason, not the strategic framework he had used to justify it to himself, but the real thing underneath. He owed her that. He had known he owed her that since the afternoon he'd looked at the paper Woo Jin set on the conference table, and the shape of his own error had become visible. Because if I asked you, he said, and I watched you deny it, I would have had to choose, in real time, in front of you, between the evidence and 3 years of knowing you. And I didn't trust myself to choose you. He held her gaze. That's the actual reason. Not the organization, not the strategy. I was afraid that if I asked and you denied it, and I still couldn't fully disbelieve the evidence, you would see it in my face. That you would know I doubted you even while you were telling me the truth. And I thought that was worse. She looked at him for a long time. That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me, she said. It's the most I've been able to afford honesty in a while. She looked down at her hands again. The light through the window had gone fully golden now, that end-of-afternoon quality that made ordinary things look more significant than they were. Or maybe, he thought, exactly as significant as they were. I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer it without thinking about what the answer should be, just what it is. Okay? If she hadn't framed me, if none of this had happened, no Sarah, no fabrication, no evidence, would we still be here? Would the marriage have lasted? He took a breath. His rib protested. He held the breath for a moment before letting it out slowly. I don't know, he said. I was trying. I meant what I said about leaving the organization, but meaning it and doing it are two different things, and I had been meaning it for 2 years without doing it. He paused. I think I needed the loss to make the doing real. I hate that that's true, but I think it is. She nodded slowly, not with satisfaction, with the expression of someone who has suspected an answer and finds no comfort in having it confirmed. The baby, she said. He waited.
I wasn't going to tell you. After I left, I decided, not out of anger or not only out of anger, that you had forfeited that knowledge when you made the choice you made, that I would raise them alone and they would know their father existed, but not. She stopped. I had it very clearly planned. And then you walked in with those envelopes and all of the clarity of the plan started going. She made a small, frustrated gesture. You have a way of doing that. Amara, shh, I'm not finished. She looked at him directly. I'm not going back to Seoul. I'm not going back to that life, that world, any of it. That's not available, whatever else happens. My child is not being raised in that. I know. Do you understand what I'm saying? Not the penthouse, not the organization, not the network of men with guns who follow you through coastal towns. She paused. None of it. I'm giving it to the investigators, he said. All of it. The accounts, the structure, the alliances, everything they need to close the exposure. I've already started. He watched her process this. There will be a period of legal proceedings. It's possible, probable, that I serve time. I don't know the terms yet. Woo Jin is working with our legal counsel on what cooperation means for the sentencing framework. She was very still. You're actually doing it, she said. Yes. Not because of me. It was not quite a question. Not only because of you, because I looked at what I built and understood what it cost. What it had already cost before that night. What it was going to keep costing. He looked at his wrapped hands. And because of you, both things are true. She stood up from the bed. She moved to the window and stood looking out at the gravel lot and the strip of sea visible past it. He watched her from the chair, the line of her shoulders, the curve of her profile, the pregnancy that had changed the architecture of her silhouette in ways he was still learning to take in without the feeling that hit him somewhere essential every time he registered it again. I don't forgive you, she said. Her voice was quiet and clear. Not tonight. Possibly not for a long time. I want you to know that I'm not standing here about to tell you it's fine, because it isn't fine and it may not be fine for a while. I know. But I also... She stopped, pressed her forehead briefly against the glass. The gesture was so unguarded that he felt he'd seen something he hadn't been meant to see. I also can't pretend that what you did today, coming here, the proof, what happened in the street, doesn't change the shape of things. Because it does. I wish it didn't, because it would be cleaner if it didn't, but it does. He didn't speak. He understood that what she was working through required space more than it required his voice. I need time, she said. Not a decision tonight, not a resolution. I need time, and I need you to be willing to let that be what it is without... She turned from the window. Without the Kang Jae-hyun version of patience, which I've seen, and which tends to involve managing outcomes from a distance. I need actual patience, the kind where you don't know how it resolves and you accept that. I can do that, he said. And then, because she deserved the full version, I'll try to do that. I'm not certain I'll always succeed, but I'll try. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something smaller and more complicated than a smile. That's the most honest thing you've ever said that wasn't the previous most honest thing, she said. He felt something shift in his chest that was not his rib. The door from the outer room opened and Woo Jin came in with the expression of a man who is interrupting a significant moment and knows it and cannot avoid it. The federal contact came back, he said. He was looking at Jae-hyun, but his gaze moved briefly, carefully, to Amara, noting her presence in the conversation. Park reached the right people. They want a meeting. Tomorrow, Seoul. He paused. They're aware you're on Jeju. They've asked that you not leave the island tonight. A request, not a requirement, but the phrasing suggests it's worth taking seriously. Seira, Jae-hyun said. Her people pulled back after this afternoon. She's still at the latte, but she's not making moves tonight. I think she's reassessing. Woo Jin paused. I think she didn't anticipate you cooperating with investigators, and she's trying to understand what that means for her exposure before she does anything else. It means she's next, Jae-hyun said. She's working that out. He nodded. Tomorrow morning, we'll take the first ferry. Woo Jin withdrew. The door settled into its not quite closed position. Amara was still standing by the window. She had heard all of it. She had the expression of a woman standing at a particular threshold, not yet across it, not stepping back from it. Stay on the island tonight, she said. Not here. I'm not saying here. But don't go back to the mainland tonight. It was not an offer of reconciliation. It was not forgiveness or a resolution or any of the things he had not come here expecting or asking for. It was a woman who had spent 5 weeks building walls saying, tonight, that one of them had a door. Okay, he said. She picked up her apron from the bed. She folded it with the efficiency of someone reclaiming small domestic order. I'm going back to the cafe. My shift isn't done and Mina has been alone since this afternoon. She moved toward the door, stopped, turned back. The baby, she said, is a girl. He felt it go through him like something physical. He held very still and let it. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was many things in the same instant, complicated and unresolved and clear as the coastal light outside the window. Then she left. He sat in the chair in the rented room above the fishing supply store and looked at his wrapped hands and breathed through his damaged rib and did not try to make the feeling into something manageable. He let it be the size it actually was. The meeting in Seoul happened 2 days later, in a federal building in Mapogu that smelled like institutional carpet and coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. Park Dae-sung sat beside Jae-hyun for all 6 hours of the initial session and then 3 hours of a second session the following morning, with the particular focused composure of a man who was very good at his work and understood that this was the most consequential engagement of his professional life. The lead investigator was a woman named Agent Cho, who had been building the Incheon case for 2.5 years and who received Jae-hyun's full cooperation with the specific, contained satisfaction of someone who has been doing a difficult job for a long time and has just watched it resolve more completely than expected. He gave them everything: the accounts, the routing structures, the alliance network, the name and specific operational details of every arrangement that could be documented. He gave them Se-ra, all of it, the Singapore accounts, the Cayman structures, the fabrication operation, the technical team, the intermediaries, the 2-year timeline. He gave them Han's documented cooperation and Ryu's undocumented conversation and the specific sequence of internal events that had compromised his own organization from within. He answered questions for 9 hours across 2 days, and he answered them without the performance of cooperation, without the calculated partials and strategic omissions that his legal counsel had outlined as options. He answered them the way a man answers questions when he has decided that the thing he is trying to protect no longer requires protecting in the way he spent 15 years protecting it. Agent Cho, at the end of the second day, looked at him across the table with an expression that was professionally neutral and said, "This is more complete than anything we built in 2.5 years." "I know," he said. "That's not a compliment." "I know that too." The terms of his cooperation were documented over the following weeks through a process that Park navigated with an attention to detail that Jae-hyun found, in retrospect, was the most valuable thing his legal counsel had ever done for him. The exposure was significant. The sentencing framework that cooperation made available was considerably less catastrophic than what it would have been without it. Not clean, not painless, not the kind of outcome that allowed anyone in the room to feel good, but defined. Navigable, with an end that could be calculated. He was looking at 3 years, possibly less with the cooperation credit applied, but 3 years as the working number that he organized everything around. 3 years was a long time. 3 years was also a finite thing, with a door at the end of it, and he had spent 15 years building a life that had no door at all, just walls in every direction that he had told himself were foundations. Yoon Sira was arrested 17 days after the Seoul meetings, in Singapore, based on the documentation Jae-hyun had provided combined with the 2-year investigative record that Agent Cho's team had already assembled. Her network across 3 jurisdictions collapsed with the speed of things that are built for opacity. They are impenetrable until the opacity is gone, and then they are very suddenly nothing at all. She was extradited to Seoul for trial and convicted on 11 counts that included fraud, evidence fabrication, criminal conspiracy, and 2 charges related to the Jeju incident that her legal team fought and lost. Jae-hyun was in a detention facility by then, processing his own sentencing, and he learned about her conviction from Park, who told him in the visiting room with the same neutral professionalism he applied to everything, which Jae-hyun had come to understand was a form of loyalty that looked nothing like loyalty, but was. Han Byung-soo cooperated fully in exchange for terms that removed him from the criminal network and deposited him, ultimately, in a quiet enforced retirement in a city he had never lived in. Ryu's situation was less severe. A cooperation agreement, financial penalties, restrictions, and he was someone Jae-hyun did not think about much after the sentencing was complete. Some relationships end not with betrayal or confrontation, but with a gradual reclassification, a shift from person to event, and Ryu became an event. Woojin was a different matter. Woojin had enough insulation, carefully, probably deliberately maintained over 7 years, that his exposure was limited and his cooperation was of the variety that cost him his career in the organization, but not his freedom. He spent 6 months in a kind of suspended state, managing the dissolution of the operational infrastructure with the same methodical thoroughness he had applied to building it. When that was done, he opened a small security consulting firm in Busan that Jae-hyun, from inside the facility, communicated about exactly once through Park, not to ask for anything, but to acknowledge it. Woojin sent back a reply through the same channel that was 3 sentences long and said, among other things, that the consulting firm had more work than expected and that Jae-hyun shouldn't read into that. He didn't. But he thought about it sometimes in the particular way you think about things that make you believe, tentatively and without overcommitting to it, that the world occasionally arranges itself with some basic fairness. Amara returned to Seoul 4 months after the Jeju incident, not to the penthouse, which had been transferred as part of the asset documentation process and was no longer his by then, but to a small apartment in Mapogu, the same district where the federal building was, which may or may not have been coincidental. She was 8 months pregnant when she moved back. She had given her notice at the Jeju Cafe with the specificity of someone closing a chapter intentionally, not fleeing it. She sent him a message through Park 2 weeks before the birth. A short message, not warm exactly, but not cold, with the particular tone of someone offering information that is owed without attaching conditions to it. She told him the due date. She told him the hospital. She told him she was not asking him to be there, but she was not asking. He was in the facility. He could not be there. He asked Park to send flowers. He understood that flowers were inadequate. He sent them anyway because the alternative was sending nothing, and he had spent enough of his life choosing the option that required nothing of him to be willing to do it again. He learned about her birth from Park, who learned it from a contact he had developed during the cooperation process, which was either a testament to Park's thoroughness or a measure of how completely Jae-hyun's world had reduced to the flow of second-hand information. A girl, 6 pounds, 3 ounces, both healthy. He sat with that information for a long time in the facility's common area, in a plastic chair under fluorescent light, and did not perform anything for anyone around him. He just sat with it until it had settled into the part of him where the real things went, the things that didn't require him to do anything with them immediately, but would be there when he needed them. He wrote her a letter that night, handwritten, 4 pages, on the plain paper the facility provided. He wrote about what he had been thinking about during the months of proceedings. He wrote about what he understood now that he had not understood before, not as explanation or justification, but as the record of a man trying to account honestly for himself. He wrote about what he hoped for without making it a request. He wrote about their daughter in the way of someone speaking carefully about a person they haven't met but feel, already, the specific gravity of. He gave the letter to Park without rereading it. He didn't trust himself to reread it. He didn't know for 3 weeks whether she read it. Then she wrote back. Her letter was 2 pages, and it was not a response to his so much as its own document, the record of her own accounting, her own version of the months in between. She wrote about Jeju without sentimentality, about what she had built there and why and what it had cost. She wrote about moving back to Seoul. She wrote about the birth, not comprehensively, not in a way that felt like sharing so much as like giving him what was fair, what he was owed for what he'd done in the street, on Jeju, with bleeding hands. She did not write about forgiveness. She did not write about the future. At the end she wrote, her name is Sue-ah. She has your jaw and my eyes, and she is already, at 3 weeks old, deeply unimpressed by everything. You would like her. He read those 3 sentences 6 times. Then he wrote back. They wrote letters for 2 years. Not every week, sometimes a month would pass, sometimes more. The letters were not love letters, or not only. They were the record of 2 people learning, through the strange medium of handwritten pages, how to be honest with each other in a way they had not fully managed when they were in the same rooms. He wrote about what was hard in the facility and what he was reading and what he was thinking about. She wrote about Sua, her development, her opinions, her early and absolute conviction that the world owed her comprehensive explanation of everything happening around her. She wrote about her work. She had taken a part-time consulting position with a nonprofit that operated in immigrant support services, work that used her language skills, and her particular combination of empathy and directness in ways she hadn't anticipated, and that suited her, it seemed, completely. She sent a photograph twice. He kept both of them in the one personal item allowance the facility permitted, a small book he had requested, and that his daughter's photograph lived inside, tucked between pages he had read enough times that he no longer needed the book, but kept it for the photograph. Sua, at 4 months, in what appeared to be a green onesie, looking at the camera with the precise expression of someone who had decided not to commit to anything yet. Sua, at 11 months, pulling herself upright against what appeared to be a couch, with the expression of a person who has just discovered that the laws of physics are negotiable if you are determined enough. He looked at them the way he breathed, necessarily, constantly, with the understanding that this was the basic mechanism keeping him functional. 3 years became 2 years and 8 months with the cooperation credit applied. He was notified of his release date on a Tuesday morning in the administrative office by a man who handled these notifications with the practiced neutrality of someone who does not allow himself to invest in outcomes. He received the information and nodded and thanked the man and went back to the common area and sat in the plastic chair under the fluorescent light and did the same thing he'd done when he heard about Sua's birth. He let it settle. He didn't try to make it into more than it was yet. He wrote Amara that evening. He told her the date. He told her he wasn't asking for anything, but that he wanted her to know, so that whatever she decided about the day had time to be a decision rather than a surprise. She didn't write back. He understood. Some things required space that letters couldn't negotiate. The morning he was released was October. Seoul in October had the quality of a city that has shed its summer self and found something leaner and clearer underneath. The light had that sharpness that meant winter was close enough to be felt without being here yet, and the air was cold without being brutal. He walked out of the facility with a bag that contained his personal book, 2 changes of clothes, the documentation from Park's office, and the 2 envelopes he'd never retrieved from the wooden table in the Jeju courtyard because Amara had taken them, but which he had received back through Park 6 months ago without explanation, the technical report and the financial documentation in their original condition, as if they had been held somewhere for safekeeping and were now being returned to their proper owner. He stood on the pavement outside the facility entrance. The city moved around him the way it always had, without acknowledgement, without accommodation, completely indifferent to the specific size of any individual moment within it. He did not know where he was going. He had an address for a small rented apartment in Mapogu that Park had arranged, the same district where Amara lived, which was either a coincidence he had not engineered or the result of trusting Park with information and allowing him to act on it, and Jae-hyun had decided not to examine the distinction too closely. He had been standing there for perhaps 2 minutes when he heard footsteps on the pavement. He turned. She was 30 meters away, walking toward him with the particular purposeful quality of someone who has made a decision and arrived on the other side of it and is not second-guessing the arrival. She was wearing a dark coat he didn't recognize. Her hair was down. She was pushing a stroller with one hand and carrying a coffee cup in the other. 2 cups, he registered, the second held against the cup she was carrying, stacked. He did not move. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see that she had not slept particularly well, that she was nervous in a way she was working to carry without showing it, that her jaw was set in the way he had always known, and that her eyes were the same as they had always been. The particular shade and quality of a person who sees things clearly and insists on continuing to do so even when it costs. She held out the second cup. He took it. Their fingers didn't quite touch. Almost. He looked down at the stroller. Sua was 2 years and 4 months old. She was wearing a yellow coat and had Amara's eyes and his jaw exactly as promised, and she was looking up at him with the precise expression of her 11-month photograph, the expression of someone who has not yet committed to anything but is running comprehensive assessments. He crouched down in front of her. His knees protested. He didn't notice. "Hi," he said. She looked at him with the thoroughness of a very small person who has opinions. "Hi," she said. It was the only thing he had ever heard her voice say, and it rearranged something in him that had been arranged incorrectly for a long time. He stood back up. Amara was watching him with an expression that had several things in it, and none of them were simple. "I didn't know if you'd be here," he said. "I didn't know either," she said. "Until this morning." He nodded. He held the coffee cup with both hands. The warmth of it went through the gauze that no longer existed but that his palms still sometimes remembered. "I'm not—" She stopped, started again, in the careful way of someone using words that they have spent time with before bringing them out into the open. "I'm not here to give you a clean ending. I want you to understand that. There's no version of this morning where everything is resolved. I know. I'm here because she deserves to meet you, because whatever happened between us, you are her father, and you walked into a street with 4 armed men and bleeding hands, and you're the reason she has a mother who came home safe. And because She stopped, looked away briefly, at the city, at the indifferent traffic, then back. "Because the letters were honest. More honest than 3 years of shared space managed to be, which is, that's a complicated thing to sit with, but it's true." "It is," he said. "I'm not making a decision today," she said, "about what this is, about what comes next." She looked at him steadily. "I'm having coffee with you."
"That's what I'm doing." He looked at her. The woman who had signed divorce papers without her hand shaking and walked out of a penthouse and crossed a bridge without looking back and built a life from nothing with the specific thoroughness of someone who does not do things halfway. The woman who had carried a secret for 6 weeks and made the decision to keep it when the alternative would have broken her. The woman who had stood in a courtyard on a coastal island and told him she was not running, holding evidence of her own innocence against her chest, 8 months after he had thrown that innocence away without asking. I thought about who she was when he met her, and who she was right now, and understood that the distance between those 2 points was something she had traveled by herself, mostly with the occasional interference of his catastrophic decisions, and that the woman standing in front of him with a coffee cup and a 2-year-old with his jaw was in every way that mattered more than she had been when he'd first understood he was in love with her. He had made many calculations in his life. He had been good at most of them. He had been wrong about the ones that mattered most. He was not going to make another calculation today. He was going to drink coffee in the October air with the woman he had loved badly and the daughter he had just met in a city that owed neither of them anything, and he was going to let that be enough. "Okay," he said. They walked. Not toward anything specific, not a destination or a resolution, not the penthouse that no longer existed, or the empire that no longer existed, or any version of a life that looked like what they'd had before. Just down the pavement, the 3 of them, in the cold October morning light, with Sua in her yellow coat looking at everything with the thorough and unimpressed assessment of a person who is new to the world and has not yet decided what she thinks of it. She reached out once, from the stroller, toward his hand. He let her take his finger. Her grip was small and absolute and warm, and he walked and breathed and felt the particular weight of it. Not heavy, not light, something between, something that required care to carry and was worth the care, and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed to be said yet. There was only the street, and the coffee going cold, and the city indifferent around them, and the small hand holding his finger with the conviction of someone who makes her decisions and does not second-guess the arrival. Chae-hyun walked. For the first time in his life, he had nowhere to be except here. It was enough. He understood with the particular clarity of a man standing on the other side of everything he had destroyed and built and lost and recovered, more than enough. It was the only thing that had ever been enough. He just hadn't known it until now.